So guys, Infinity Inc. Part 2, Stargirl Season 3, Episode 8. This is my review, recap, and breakdown. And this episode was very intriguing. It was quite straightforward in some ways, but with what we learned out of it, such as other Helix members that we got teased with right at the beginning, to the end scene with whatever the heck they're setting up there with the Shade, Jenny, Todd, also the Sandman reference, and then of course the twist at the end. And I can't wait to talk to you guys about that, because this is, as what I've said many times, one of my most anticipated things about season 3 was the murder mystery. Now, we were thinking along the way, are they setting up how Todd Rice in Obsidian mode could be going around murdering people, and Mr. Bones trying to be helpful, which turned out to kind of be true with Dr. Love was trying to keep that at bay, but it turns out that was just to try and prevent the end of the world, and it wasn't trying to keep him at bay from losing control and murdering people. It turns out the killer is indeed someone still mysterious. I'm sure many of you still think Dragon King, but today we're going to look at maybe some other suspects. So let's go through this episode. Do go ahead and like this video. It takes 2 seconds. Hit that little thumbs up button and maybe consider subscribing. Tons of you who watch these weekly Stargirl videos aren't actually subscribed, so my analytics says. So if you do find yourself coming back here, would really appreciate it and mean a lot to me to help my channel grow through clicking that subscribe button. But right at the beginning, we wake up with Pat and Shade in the Shadowlands. And until that corruption is freed from Jenny's Green Lantern light, then they're basically screwed. And so this set us up on a journey all episode long with the typical kind of Stargirl faith and optimism and hope and everything, which I don't mind so much, of course. You get cheesy at points, but this is a part of the show's DNA. Breck Bassinger's Courtney and Stargirl and just what we learn within that of the lore is honing in on the family connection, the hope, the light, and how that can conquer the darkness. This is what I mean by some of the cheese, but it does get you into that experience with this show, which I don't think I would indulge too much with elsewhere. But as I've said, ever since season 1, it gives that adventurous spirit, kind of E.T.-esque hopeful vibe. And I don't mean obviously the E.T. movie, but you know what I mean. The essence there is captured in this show. And at the very beginning, we actually get some members of Helix shown to us, which we knew this place was housing the other gifted members, but so far we just knew that Todd Rice was staying there. But it was quite awesome in how we saw Penny Dreadful, the cute critter, Tal Jones, Cacharo, which, we only heard a little bit of a growl from behind the door. But what I am wondering with what Mr. Bones said at the end, just jumping to that already, I wonder if we should form a team of our own. Maybe if we will actually see some, maybe not all of them, because, we didn't actually see Cacharo other than hearing that growl, but he's essentially King Shark. To put it bluntly, he is a man shark. Getting to my point here, I wonder if they'll return to help out with, whenever this threat is revealed, if there is a big boss battle, maybe Mr. Bones could come as some backup, because as I said in last week's episode, I think there's a shady element, no pun intended, to Mr. Bones and Dr. Love, but maybe not the way that some people were thinking, which could maybe be a misdirect that might disappoint some people, because they might have thought, okay, he's really behind all of this. But even in the source material, he's not black and white evil. There is that nuance there, of which I feel like they adapted quite well. But either way, with him mentioning the team, maybe they could come out with those members that we saw on screen. But maybe we might not see the members that we didn't see, like Cacharo, but you never know. They could do a flash CGI type thing with King Shark and get them all together to back up Courtney and the JSA and whatever trouble lies ahead with that hooded, mysterious figure. Now, this is when we see Todd in a bit more of his Obsidian form, and amongst all of this, because he's connected to the Shadowlands, it makes sense that he would see one of the wraiths, if you will, and we saw, I guess, one of the caretakers at one of the group homes he grew up with completely ripping into him about his sexuality, saying that he was going to fix his sins, beat it out of him and whatnot. And this is when Jenny tried to help, and yet again it yielded in another explosion of Green Lantern fire, and everyone kind of got knocked out, and everyone was put in their own rooms and woke up a little bit later. Courtney says she's not going anywhere, and she says, "My dad," and then Pat. That was a very kind of sweet line there, because she is viewing Pat more and more as her father, as she should, but this is definitely a bit of a tease that I think somewhere along in this season we'll maybe actually get a proper recognition of a conversation of dialogue between these two characters going down that line of "you are my father, Pat," or something like that. Meanwhile, with Jenny, she's in a room and tries to get out with the Green Lantern ring, but the powers don't work because Mr. Bones said that the room is designed for her protection and theirs. It's coated with an energy diffusing polymer. And I actually like the depth they gave to Mr. Bones here with the realization he had with that conversation with Courtney by the end of this episode, in that because of him being born this way with this kind of transparent skin, the cyanide touch, which they touched on later through killing that plant and unfortunately killing his mother, he, tries to help out other kids. So his mission is one that is meant to be helpful, but at the same time, he's going about it in a way where out of his own fear and experience, he feels that other gifted individuals should also be isolated and deal with things alone, which, it does get sympathy from me because I understand his worldview, but as Courtney encourages, it doesn't have to be that way. So yeah, Mr. Bones having like a whole full circle arc here, realizing that you shouldn't hide from the world, and maybe actually I don't need to do that. It's almost as if Courtney sang to him like, "I can show you the world," and then Mr. Bones just duetted with her. And again, could mean that we see him again with a couple of the members to help out later on in the season. Now, once again, Courtney's optimism is like, well, no, they shouldn't be away from each other. They need each other. Life isn't about living in isolation. It can't be, because if we're alone, what is the point of anything? And initially I was thinking, why would Mr. Bones kind of really listen to Courtney here? But I think the way I'm choosing to look at it is that he has lived a life alone. Like, he isn't a young man. He's probably middle-aged, roughly. I did initially think it was a bit kind of, not contrived is the word, but like, oh, of course, there's no backlash, no, putting, because he could have easily have been like, okay, no, screw you, Courtney, putting you back in the cell, we're doing it my way. But instead, he's like, if you're wrong, we all die. And I like to choose to believe that Mr. Bones has been yearning for maybe a way of sorting things out that doesn't involve being alone. As Courtney says, what's the point of anything if we are alone? So he decides to somewhat apprehensively share Stargirl's optimism in this moment. The only reluctance I have on fully believing it is that he's never really met Stargirl so much. He's not the one who's had the CCTV on her. So if he truly believes that Todd Rice could end the world, and he's placing all of the faith of, I guess, the entire planet and its population in the advice, I guess, of optimism of a young girl, that's a bit hard to believe for me, but I'm a bit of a sucker for Mr. Bones' arc with the backstory this episode, so I would love to know what you think of that. Now, as for the Shade and Pat in the Shadowlands, it was fairly straightforward. I wasn't really expecting too much from this. I would have to say that my favorite part of it is getting a bit more into the Shade's backstory. I really like the character and the actor of the Shade in Stargirl ever since he came in. With the gambler and the diner, he kind of guilt trips the Shade into being like, this is the place you didn't forgive me, and what did you say to your sister on the day that she died? And that was a bit of a reverse thing, because he didn't say anything, because as we later learned, he was never there. As for Pat, we got to meet his dad, who just really put him down, saying every time you tried to fix something, you just made it worse, like our family. This is when they went through another door, and that's when we were faced with the Shade's sister, and he was constantly trying to get out of that room. I wish we got a bit more depth into this, but I feel like actions spoke louder than words, in the sense that he just kept trying to escape. He says that he's incapable of feeling pain, but I think that's kind of contradictive in a good way with the storytelling, because he didn't want to face that pain. I think he buries pain so deep that he feels like he doesn't feel it, but really through constantly trying to get away, he doesn't ever want to even touch the recognition of the feeling of pain when it comes to his past. I did feel like it was a bit weird with the way they wrote that Pat's advice was maybe the key is to face things, you don't run away. Courtney faced her own darkness, that's how she survived, and yet Pat kicks the door open for them to run away, in a manner of speaking. I don't know, like, it's just, it would have been cool to see. I feel like it would have been a very touching scene. Maybe they have this planned in the future, I don't know, for the Shade to actually walk towards his sister, maybe have a conversation, even though it is wraiths at the end of the day. I know they did get a lot of message through the subtext of him trying to get out, but, to then chuck in the line of Pat saying, maybe the key is not to run away, you need to face things in here, then proceeds to kick the door and run away. It felt a little bit kind of backwards to me in that moment. The next room that they went into, which was, of course, Pat's and Courtney's home, was a very interesting part, because it brought out the recognition of why Mike is, I guess you would say, a bit of a try-hard. The Wraiths in this moment tried to convey to Pat that he feels just as he did with his father, and he feels worthless. He thinks about his mother, Maggie, every single day. I wonder if the fact that they're teasing this stuff, we might get some kind of involvement of his mother in the future, maybe a future season, if we get a future season. I feel like that was a bit too much of a deliberate tease. And I don't know how to feel about that, because I can imagine, that's a story we've seen many times before in movies and TV shows, when the mum, despite abandoning him when he was like 3 or 5, comes back into his life, 10 years later or whatever. But we're gonna have to wait and see. But for sure, the message of Mike feels just as unwanted as Courtney does, tries everything to get your attention, rings in Pat's head even when they're on a coach back. By the way, just jumping to that, when Courtney was like, how are we gonna get home? I was just kind of confused. It's like, don't you have phones? Didn't you bring your phone with you? You could have rang Barbara to give you a lift. But either way, this is when everything sets on green fire. And back with Courtney and Jenny and Dr. Love. Jenny goes in. We have Todd in full Obsidian form. She approaches him with her light, and it kind of creates this little cloud and somewhat dreamscape situation to the place of where they were first torn apart from each other. And more or less in this moment, she just kind of shot the little black goo out of the ring back into Todd. That seemed to, I guess, complete him, and she is now separated from the Shadowlands, so I guess everything has a bit of an equilibrium now, and now they're more or less together. I did feel like that was quite a simple finish, but at the same time, I guess they knew that the ring was corrupted with the black goo, so I guess it was as straightforward as, with Courtney's advice, approaching it with the light to his darkness and stuff, just shooting the black goo back out and separating those two energy sources. But yeah, this is when everyone was back in the room. Pat and the Shade appeared, and we're more or less at the end of the episode now. This is when one of the biggest drops happen. It's kind of predictable in a way, but no matter what, it baited us along even more to wanting to know this answer with what they showed next. We have Courtney say, but the CCTV, was that really necessary? Why were you watching us this whole time? Dr. Love is like, please, I haven't been doing that. What are you talking about? Don't be so ridiculous. We also have Courtney at the same time learn that people aren't held here against their will, just kind of making Mr. Bones and Dr. Love look even less shady, because anyone staying there can go, but at the same time, it's just realizing that the place is a safe refuge for at least those who are scared of what their powers might do and have still yet to control it, which just kind of sets up the team even more, that Mr. Bones might transform the place into more of an academy to hone in. Just kind of like, to be honest, Charles Xavier's school for the gifted. So up next, we have Pat encourage the Shade to offer Todd his hand and help with the Shadowlands powers, because at the end of the day, he's a rookie, and the Shade reluctantly does that, and they open a portal to New York. And the reason why they're going there is because Jenny says that Sandy Hawkins contacted her because she's been having nightmares, and she said she would help out with his nightmares. But the cool thing about this is, as Jenny said, he is a son of Wesley Dodds. And Pat is just like, what, the Sandman? And in true Stargirl fashion, there's a lot of Golden Age leaning into stuff here. So long story short, if you're familiar with the Sandman, Dream, Morpheus, whilst he was imprisoned, there was actually a bit of a connection there with another, what should I say, immortal, who took over that responsibility, so to speak. He more or less had some of Dream's powers and filled that void, and he went round using those powers similar to Dream, sending people to sleep like criminals, and became the Golden Age hero known as the Sandman. And through these somewhat horrific nightmares and dreams, that's how he kind of found pretty bad criminals, which is a pretty cool power. So it's like, okay, what's my next mission? Gotta dream it again, gotta go after this guy. And now we have that little lead from Jenny saying, well, Sandy Hawkins is having bad dreams about us, so let's go over there, start this little quest. And so it's kind of weird. It was almost like a little backdoor pilot in that sense, as if they're setting up something. Now, I really don't think there is going to be a spin-off show, but the Shade is now going to help train, I guess you could say, Todd Rice, Obsidian. Jenny is going to go over to Sandy Hawkins, so it's like they're going off on their own little adventure. I wonder when we're going to see them pop up again. But that was a pretty cool way to end the episode. But that didn't quite end the episode, because when Courtney and Pat were on the bus back, Pat was a bit daydreamy because the Shadowlands and what they said about Mike was living rent-free in his head. She said there was one question left. If Helix hasn't been spying on us, then who is it? And we saw the CCTV room, the surveillance room, and we saw this hooded figure. Now, what I like with what they've done about this, and I did definitely consider that the grunting and grumbling of whoever this was all these episodes past did kind of seem as though that was Mr. Bones' voice, because it had that similar kind of cadence to it, if you will. But it isn't. And you could argue, and a lot of people thought that the growling of this character could be Dragon King. But again, it could be Dragon King, but I want it to be someone different, because it's like, really? They've been also teasing that. Dragon King could still be around. I feel like for that very reason as well, that could be a misdirect, and this is someone else. And so we saw this figure in a hood, and we saw a lot of their body, to be honest, and we saw the camera, and I thought it was going to pan around to his face, but I should have known better. But the episode ends off with that villain, if you will, punching the CCTV of Rick saying, "We're coming for you." Now, some people are leaning into, could that person be related to Rick then? You know, the fact that they chose to punch that screen, I don't know about that. I mean, I definitely understand the theory behind it. Some people are saying, what if it's his uncle somehow and he's got powers now? I feel like that'd be a bit disappointing to me. Some people are saying, what if Icicle has somehow come back and the grunting and grumbling of the voice is, you know, maybe him at a certain different power level, or kind of recovering from being, you know, blasted into 1,000 pieces from Mike when he got hit by the car? Could be, but yeah, I'm very intrigued. I honestly have no idea. It could be Dragon King, but I don't know. I really want it to be someone different. So I guess, you know, ending this review and breakdown and recap, I leave the floor to you. Who do you think this figure is that you're seeing right now? He's literally spying on the JSA. He's got cameras in all of their homes. We really need to think to ourselves, like, who would be doing this? Why would they be doing this to a point of passion and rage, and where they punch the freaking screen of Rick, our man's CCTV? I hope it's not disappointing, and I hope the reason behind it is justified. Like, you know, this person is that angry at them and wants to go after them for a reason. I enjoyed this episode. While it was fairly straightforward, it tapped into several avenues of really interesting teasers. It's definitely got us fascinated with what's going to happen in the future. And speaking of that future, the promo for next episode, it seems as though Courtney wants to tell Cameron everything about the JSA, her being Stargirl. It looks like the grandparents are getting their icicle powers out, and it looks like Rick is going to be driven to something, even looking like he's attacking Courtney from what I'm seeing on my screen right now, and she has a little bubble shield of ice around her, so maybe that's Cameron defending her, I'm not sure. But also, with her shouting and proclaiming like, "Rick, stop," he's obviously fueled and overdriven with that roid rage I mentioned because of the 24/7 hourglass thing. He says, "I warned you." I guess he feels justified in whatever happens next because of his paranoia of Cameron being like his father and stuff, but either way, he's definitely fueled by the roid rage. So it looks like an interesting episode next week as well. But that just about wraps up today's review, guys. Would really appreciate any kind of comment, theory you have. Love reading through all of them, and any support you want to give to the channel, whether that's liking this video, as I said earlier, subscribing if you want to stay up to date with reviews like this, news breakdowns. I did a big news roundup yesterday on major DC things happening, such as James Gunn leading DC Studios, Superman returning, of course, and the Batman Arkham series spin-off, GCPD spin-off, and all kinds of other things. But I'm going to love you and leave you, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow people of Blue Valley in the next video. Goodbye.